Hi, I'm kellyannkhaos. Welcome to this channel, Stone The Crone. On the weekend just gone, I had a huge turfy weekend and I spoke about the speaker's corner a bit and my talk and how it went a little bit separate from its original topic. And on the Sunday we had a little conference where there was two speakers. One was like a video type of thing. So she was from New South Wales, and the other lady had come into the city to speak to her. As I've explained before, Queensland is a really huge place, so she's had to travel quite a distance and stay for the weekend to talk to us. And I really appreciate the effort that goes into having to get a bunch of TERFs together where we live. It's not easy to do on the ground sort of rallies and activism and that type of thing with any great number of women, because it is hard to sort of get us all to, within a time frame into one place. So the two speakers that spoke was Jeanette Fraser and Steph Hughes. And Jeanette Fraser, I posted her little thing on GETTR, on my GETTR. So if you on GETTR, go to Stone The Crone and have a look. I've posted it there. The YouTube channel that I've shared is IWD Brisbane Minging, which is spelled MEANJIN, which is the Indigenous word for Brisbane. So that's where we live. Brisbane being the English and Mingin being the Indigenous word for Brisbane. Jeanette covered a lot of the self-ID itself and what that means, and also touched on quite a lot of what it means for women in prison. This is the reason why it's taken me a little time actually to make this video. I actually found the whole talks by the two ladies to be extremely overwhelming with statistics, and that stuff needs to sit in my head for a little bit, and I need to be able to reflect on that. Steph Hughes is a champion. Like, the work that she's doing, especially for Queensland women on this subject, is nothing more than absolutely remarkable. She is going in and getting the statistics and applying through what they call it freedom of information, which is always funny to me because freedom of information better cost you for the privilege, right? Like, you've got to pay for that right to have that freedom of information. And so there was literally a lot of graphs. There was a lot of, like I said, there was a lot of statistics. And some of the statistics is very mind-blowing. She also spoke about one Indigenous male who was a male to female transgender. So this is someone who says they have a female soul, identifies as a woman, which I just don't even know what that fucking means, hey, and he died in custody, and it was really full on, because this death has been really documented as a trans person's death rather than an Indigenous person's death in prison. And we have a very high number of Indigenous people who die in jails or die in detention. So that was surprising. And the question, I suppose, was, why isn't this a Indigenous death in custody statistic rather than a trans death statistic? There seems to be a lot, as we know, of these statistics that are sort of milked from one list and put into another list. It seems to be very convenient. I will post Steph Hughes' talk on my GETTR once that's put up onto IWD Women. I will put it up there then. I was going to try to share it directly to my YouTube channel. I'm just not 100% sure how to do that, as I run this whole channel off my iPad, not a main computer. Some of the graphs that she had, and they do the Queensland prison population on the 30th of June each year. So, and then you have this graph, and it's got in blue males, in red women. And so 2019, as of June 2019, there was a total of 7,890 men incarcerated in Queensland prison. June 30th every year. So the statistic that she's actually gotten is the number of inmates in Queensland prisons, both men and women. So in 2013 through to 2019. So it says basically here that as of 2019, the amount of men in Queensland prisons was 7,890 men housed in Queensland jails or prisons. At the same time, there is 855 women currently housed in Queensland detention centres and prisons. So when you look at the amount of men who want to ID as a woman to get into women's spaces, this is where we start getting a bit of a problem, because it is clear that there is such a difference in numbers between men incarcerated in prison and female incarceration in prison. So 2019, we had 7,890 men incarcerated in Queensland prisons, with, at that point, 27 IDing as transgender. We had 855 women incarcerated in women's prisons, with one person who IDs as transgender. So that person is a female to male, where there is 27 from male to female. So I found these statistics to be quite full on. Is 387 men. Women, there is 45. So 45 women currently incarcerated in Queensland prisons for murder. Of the 387 men incarcerated in Queensland prisons for murder, 3 of them are transgender. 3. And 0 women. So I think that's fascinating in the regards that if you're going to put a female to male in male's prison, we're not putting murderers, women who murder people, in with the men. But we are putting men who identify as women who murder people into women's prisons. What would be interesting to note is the 3 men who identify as women, who were the people that they killed? Were these men on women violence. So was it a woman who was killed? Was it a man that was killed? So it'd be really, really interesting to actually find out whether or not these 3 males who identify as trans, who they actually killed. But Steph was literally saying that there was no details of names. She's just getting statistics and numbers, but there's no names behind the statistics. So it's not saying Fred Smith now IDs as Megan Apple, and he didn't trans until he started going to court, and he killed a woman. None of that information seems to be here. It's just literally numbers. But I think for us here in Queensland, it's a very interesting place to do a sort of test on these numbers with, because of the complete disparity between the male inmates to female inmates. So this is still 2019, and it's still a little bit behind the ball in, say, current numbers. So obviously she just can't get the current numbers currently at the moment. So we looked a little briefly at the numbers and the graph of those who identify as trans, both male to female and female to male, and whether or not what the statistic was for death. So we'll just have a little bit look at the numbers of the aggressive sexual assault numbers. So in 2019, there was currently 958 men in total that are in prison for aggravated sexual assault out of the 7,890 people. 5 of the 27, so there's 27 all up of transgender male to female identifying in Queensland prisons, and 5 of those 27 are there for aggravated sexual assault. So if you add that to the number previous from the murder rate of male to females, you've got 8 people. So 8 male to female identified humans out of 27. That's a huge number. I mean, for violent crimes, that's extremely, it's huge. It's a huge number. Literally looking at 1 in 5, thereabouts. So, I mean, it's 27. 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 transgender male to females will be incarcerated for aggravated sexual assault. Absolutely mind-blowing. So as for the women in comparison, there's currently 10 women in Queensland prisons for aggravated sexual assault. And keep in mind, this is 2019. And as out of those transgender identifying people, which is there is one transgender at 2019, one transgender woman who identifies as male, and that one person is in there for aggravated sexual assault. I find that really, really interesting, because it would be real. I mean, is this person, this woman, this born woman who identifies as a male, have they been on testosterone? That's what they're in there for. They're in there for that. So be interesting to know, is that particular person, are they in there on T? Are they in there on testosterone? Is this something that they have been putting into their system? So again, fascinating, really, really fascinating statistics. And I actually think, because we are again, like I said, because we're in Queensland, we have probably quite a unique perspective on this. Just to sum up a little bit, I know I've just thrown a lot of like numbers and stuff, and I do not know how this will listen back, but there is literally less than 1,000 Queensland women incarcerated in Queensland jails, in comparison to just under 8,000 men incarcerated in women's prison. If you take this 27 men who identify with women and you put them into a Queensland prison, it doesn't do much for the number of men. Like, it doesn't change their percentage of number of men who are incarcerated, not very much at all. But it does completely change the number of women who are incarcerated. There was 10 women who identified, but when you take that one transgender female to male, so that leaves 9. There was 9 women that did not identify other than being a woman, and 1 person that identified as a male. So that's, 10 to 1 is 10%. So is that something that we've got to be looking at in the future too? Like 10% of the women that are aggressive with sexual violence could possibly be on T. So I just wanted to go over a couple of those little graphs and numbers with you. And I actually thought it was really, really fascinating. It's taken me a few days to let that seep into the consciousness, like liquid gets into chalk. As you can see, there's not a lot of women in Queensland prisons that have committed murder. There's not a lot of women in Queensland prisons that have committed aggravated sexual assault on a fellow person. And if you take them out, I think it was 3 in there for murder and 10 in there for sexual assault, so which is 13 women. Thank you, Steph. Steph, you're a warrior, you're a legend. Anyway, love you now. Talk to you later. Stone out.